There's been a lot of focus in recent weeks on the drama and dysfunction coming out of the state's Cannabis Control Commission, from ongoing structural concerns to accusations of misconduct and the suspension of Chair Shannon O'Brien, who's now suing the state because of it. There has been a lot to cover, but, well, it's all been playing out. The commission has continued to regulate the cannabis industry, and they've been making some big changes. The acting chair of the commission, Ava Callender Concepcion, joins me now to talk him through. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So you just completed, you and your colleagues on the commission, this big revamp of regulations governing the industry. And I know some of what you did is aimed at implementing this new law involving boosting equity in the industry. Can you tell me what you are going to be doing, what the state's going to be doing differently on that front moving forward?
So that bill, so Chapter 180 is probably the biggest, most comprehensive changes we've had in the cannabis industry since the creation of the Cannabis Control Commission back in 2017. But what that bill does is it hits a few different things. One, it gives the commission authority and oversight over host community agreements. And those are the agreements that potential licensees have to enter into with the area, the town or the city where they want to be located. The other thing is, we've always had equity requirements at the state level. So we are the first state in the entire United States of America to have equity baked into our statute and the way that we function here in the cannabis space. But that didn't apply to municipalities. So this new law requires municipalities to enact equity provisions within their licensing process, within their interactions with cannabis entities going forward to increase social equity participants within this space. And then the other thing that is combed into that, I guess there are two more things. One is the social consumption. So this law fixes a component of the law that prevented social consumption from happening. And then the last thing is around suitability. So this law creates more access to employment opportunities for people who have criminal records.
And I think some of our viewers will know this, but when it comes to the equity piece, the idea in part was that the industry was going to provide opportunities to communities that have been harmed in the war on drugs, born in disproportionate impact, and that has not exactly played out so far the way that people had hoped, right?
I think that's a fair statement to make. We have made strides in the Cannabis Control Commission with the creation of our social equity program that is specifically for individuals from harmed communities, those communities that we've identified as being the most impacted by the war on drugs. There are expedited review processes for those individuals as well, but we understand that there was more that needed to happen, and that was sort of the crux of our advocacy and efforts for Chapter 180 to be created and then ultimately enacted.
You mentioned social consumption, which I was going to ask you about last, but let's talk about it now. So social consumption, again, as many people will know, involves being able to go like to a cafe type setting, right? Congregate, use cannabis products. What is the future of that at this point? Because it's not happening now.
It's not happening yet. It's not happening yet, but there is a working group already working diligently to come to the commission, the full commission, with their recommendations on what this should look like, and that's being led by two other commissioners. So my colleagues, Commissioner Camargo and Commissioner Stebbins, who have done hearings throughout the Commonwealth. They've visited a number of different locations, and they're really trying to understand the social consumption space and how it can be applied here, because there are other states that currently have social consumption. We won't be the first. Right? California, Colorado, there are a few others that that also have that in mind and that are already have that available to licensees. But we are really mindful about the public safety implications of that, and also making sure that this is actually a license type that is feasible for equity participants, because it will be exclusively available for people who've gone through either our social equity program or who are certified as economic empowerment applicants.
How soon might those type of establishments end up rolling out? What's a realistic time frame?
I can give you a realistic time frame for the regulations. I believe within, definitely within the next year. Like that's something that will, yes. But in terms of when someone would commence operations as a social consumption entity, I can't really give you a clear picture on that.
And one more question about, I think, Chapter 180. Am I right that individual municipalities are going to be able to, they can proactively opt in, right? Or opt out? of this?
No. So that was originally something that was considered by the former iteration of commissioners at the Cannabis Control Commission. But that was, we referred to it as the pilot program, and the opting in, opting out. That is something that will no longer be a part of the process going forward, but I can't tell you the logistics of that just because I'm not the individual.
I'm glad you set me straight on that, though. I want to ask you about former Chair Shannon O'Brien, who was suspended by Treasurer Deborah Goldberg, the characterization that she made of the CCC in the lawsuit that she filed in response to her suspension. She called the place that you represent, quote, an agency which is widely recognized to be broken and failing to serve the public interest and the interests of disadvantaged communities in particular because of an entrenched bureaucracy and infighting. What do you make of her assessment?
I think I can only speak to my own experience, right? I think that her experience might be a little bit different from what I've experienced here, but I've been really vocal about my own initiatives and priorities here, and for the most part have been successful in making sure that we are really talking about equity in a way that is inclusive of the communities we're talking about, and making sure that we realize when we say, you know, those who've been impacted by the war on drugs, it's not a foregone time. I think this is evident, and I mentioned suitability, which is something that I have been the lead on in terms of the way that we regulate and making sure that we're not creating additional collateral consequences for people who have been the most impacted by the war on drugs.
Again, if someone has a criminal record, making it easier for them to get access
creating
to
gainful employment opportunities in a space that they've already been a part of. And that is also a way that we are combating that legacy marketplace and making it less appealing. It's like we want to understand it. We want to make sure that the communities that have been the most impacted are heard and a part of these processes. And I think that what we've been able to accomplish is it tells on itself. We wouldn't have been able to do this if it wasn't for staff involvement and having people coming to the table and working in a real cohesive way.
There is, as you know, a push in the wake of Shannon O'Brien's suspension for increased oversight from Beacon Hill, including possibly an independent inspector general for the CCC. What do you think of the idea of having an inspector general for the organization?
I think it's an interesting concept. I think it also shows the need for increased understanding of the Cannabis Control Commission. So I think before we started, I mentioned the fact that there's increased intention right now on the agency itself. And you might think that it's a negative, but in reality, I think it offers an opportunity for us to really engage more and get the public eye to understand that this is an agency and an industry that is really growing at a rapid speed. So the attention makes sense. But we're also, there are certain layers here. So there are 3 constitutional officers who have the appointing authority over the commissioners in this space.
Right, we got the treasurer,
the governor, and the attorney general, who is my appointing authority. And below that, you have the 5 commissioners, and then we have leadership and staff and so forth. But what I would say to that is we also have talk to the legislature. I've created our executive and legislative outreach strategy, which was geared towards making sure that we constantly have a free flow of information, that we have that transparency. One of those things that I also did was around the State of Cannabis event that is held on Beacon Hill in the State House, to make sure that we're available and answering any questions that might, be in the midst. So I think that what we've been able to accomplish, and the legislature listening in the passage of Chapter 180 and trusting us with increased authority, is telling. I think that it's also important to recognize that the legislature is a large number of individuals.
That's very true.
And there are, I believe, like 5 or 6, you can correct me if I'm wrong, who are the authors of the correspondence that you reference. But
they don't speak for the totality.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. We have to leave it there due to time constraints, but Ava Callender Concepcion, thank you for this conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.